Hey, welcome to The Sinner and the Saint. I'm Alyssa Bell.
And I'm Allison Kane.
You know what I think is so funny?
Give it to me.
People think that you and I spend like hours and hours and hours and hours together. But the truth is, the time that we spend together is so rooted in our souls and with God that we're closer, even though we spend a little bit of time together.
That is so true.
I was thinking the other day, you called me recently on a Thursday morning, and you're like, hey, I'm just checking in to see how you're doing. You've been on my mind. And whenever I'm on your mind,
Yeah, it's a problem.
there's normally something going on. And while we were talking on the phone, like one of the things happened. I was like, oh, my neighbor just called and said there was a tree across the driveway. And it's being revealed to me as I'm on the phone with you. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's not just a...
I was like, oh, no wonder you were on my mind.
Right.
I mean, she's like driving up, seeing the tree, seeing the pin. She's like, oh my gosh. Oh. And I'm like, holy cow.
But this was like the fourth happening of the morning.
Yes.
And it was not even, it was 10 a.m.
Yes.
Like my
The
morning.
tree was the final straw.
Right.
No pun intended.
Right. It had started at 4 a.m.
Yes.
Yeah. And so it's just funny how connected we are. Mm-hmm. And like God is
Because we
going.
really only see each other once a week.
Right.
And we don't even get to talk on the phone that much.
Exactly.
Like, you're a busy lady.
I know. Not forever.
Not forever.
My youngest is 12. Before you know it, boom.
Well, it reminds me of what we're going to talk about today, like these two friends walking down the road.
Okay.
And it's the story of the road to Emmaus, which probably many of you are familiar with, but there are these two dudes who are not the disciples, not any of them. Neither of them were one of the disciples, but so these two dudes walking down the road, and Jesus kind of joins them. And this is after he has, died and been resurrected, and he's back on earth.
Okay, wait. Is there rumor that he's hanging out?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
So
here he
it's just
is.
like somebody gossiping around town, like, oh my gosh, did you hear?
Yeah, but really, they're not even talking about that. Jesus joins them. They just think he's some random guy, and he's like, hey, what are y'all talking about? And they're like, are you like the only one in all of Jerusalem who hasn't heard this story? Like there was this man, and he was a prophet, and we had all of our hopes that he was the one that was going to deliver Israel, but now it's the third day. And some of the women have completely confused us. Early this morning, they were at the tomb. They came back with this story of this vision. But they didn't, Jesus is gone, but they didn't see Jesus, or they hadn't gotten like all the news. So they're just going on and on. And how interesting to be Jesus in this moment.
I was just thinking that. Do you know when you're
covert
little?
operative.
Yeah, you're little, and they're like, "Oh, would you want to be invisible, or would you want?" So, like,
Totally.
what superpower do you want?
Yeah, and he's like, "Here I am," and they don't even know. This is so awesome.
I would ask a lot of probing questions.
Yeah,
which is why
I
I'm
don't
not
think he had
Jesus.
much time. I don't think he had much time for that.
I'd be like, "Sit down, let's break some bread."
Yeah,
I'm just kidding.
So his response is so funny to me. Jesus says, and of course, y'all know Message translation. Then he says to them, so thick-headed, so slow-hearted. Why can't you believe all the prophets said? Don't you see that these things had to happen? That the Messiah had to suffer and only then enter into his glory? And he's just like, oh my gosh, you dummies.
And I would be like, "Yo, who are you?"
Yeah.
Like, excuse me, 2 against 1, brother. We could take you out.
So he goes on, and they actually enjoy the conversation because he goes on to share all these things, goes back through scripture and reiterates all these things. And then he's like, all right, I'm out. And they're like, no, stay. We're enjoying your company so much. And so they sit down by the fire, and Jesus, it wasn't until they sat down and he broke bread and blessed it and then disappeared that they were like, oh my gosh, holy cow, that was Jesus.
So wait, he disappeared?
Yeah.
So he broke the bread and then poof, he was gone?
Well, he broke the bread and then and blessed it, and then they their eyes were open to it, but it just says he disappeared. So I don't really know how it went down.
I'm gonna need to know how that went down.
It's not in scripture.
Darn it.
You'll have to put that on your your TBA, to be asked in heaven.
TBD. That is so long. Thanks.
So anyway, for making that long story
No, that was good.
short for a reason is I started thinking about, like, here are these two dudes. They are literally walking with Jesus.
Right.
Physically, he is there, right there. And they don't even know. They don't recognize him. And so I just asked myself, like, how many times is Jesus with me? Like, speaking with me, walking alongside me, and I don't even notice. I just, like these two guys on the road to Emmaus. And then what gets in the way? And I know that we've talked about this before, but this is kind of a different level. We're going to add in today some actual science. I mean, we're not scientists, but Melissa listens to all these brain podcasts. And anyway, there's actual scientific and biblical stuff that fits together in this this issue of why can't we hear God? Why can't we recognize him? So we've got 3 things that we just want to consider today.
Yes. Okay.
All right. So the first one is your brain.
Okay, that just reminded me of like the 80s commercial. This is your brain.
Oh, this is your brain on drugs. Yes. So this is your brain with your, what they call RCs, relational circuits, working. And then this is your RCs not working. And this is an actual thing. And these RCs in our brain, these relational circuits, can hinder and help us in our relational capacity with other people. Mm-hmm. That includes the Lord.
Interesting. So I was listening to a podcast today, shocker, and they were talking about trauma and how trauma affects the brain and changes the brain. So yes. It's crazy that we're talking about this today because there are 3 different types of trauma, and depending on how early you were when your trauma started, depends on how much it affects your brain. So if it happens before you're 20-something years old, your brain is very malleable then, right? And so it's just fascinating to me when you look at the way the world has been shaped, even just from COVID.
Yes.
I mean,
oh my gosh.
The research is there, the information is there. We're just not all willing to look at it.
That's right.
And so, the different types of trauma, there's a trauma where it's an acute trauma where something happened abruptly. You had an accident or somebody passed away suddenly, or it was a life event that was shocking that kind of shakes you and gets into your brainwaves. There's something, and I forgot what this is called. It's like perpetual, but that's not the word they use. It's just a constant. It's always there. Right. And it's otherness is what they called it. And they said otherness can create this perpetual trauma of you're not fitting in. You're different. So for me, I'm very small. And so all of my life I've been other. Even if I didn't have everything else going that happened in my life, I would be an other because I'm 5 feet tall.
Gotcha.
And so then there was one more, and I don't remember exactly what that one was because I'm 20 minutes into the 2-hour podcast.
Okay.
The information, you could chew on it for days.
Yeah.
So it's just fascinating. And they said that the trauma, I'm probably getting too far into this, but your trauma changes your brainwaves, and then you have children, and then the way you're responding to the world changes the way the kids respond to the world.
It's true.
Anyway.
The good news is that we can reconnect. We can work on and reestablish healthy relational circuits in our brain.
Yes, it's very fun. I've been doing it for a year.
So you can do it, and it's a thing. But I will say, so just use, this is my example. When things get really stressful for me, and it's just like chaos, or, a death, or there's grief, or some sort of trauma, or pain, or whatever, despair, or you're just on high alert mode, it is very difficult for me to sit down and focus and spend time in prayer and conversation with God. And we've talked about this before, times in our lives where that's where that intercessory prayer is so important. And I think I'm just kind of putting all these pieces together. Those intercessory prayers, basically when other people are praying for you, they are interceding on your behalf with the Lord. And I've always been so grateful for that in times of stress in my life, because I just don't even have the words. I mean, there have been nights where I can sit down and I'm like, I'm going to say the blessing. I'm like, dear Lord, thank you. Amen.
Right.
Like that's all I've got. And that is a brain thing, because the state of our brain's receptivity can affect our ability to notice God with us, speaking to us. And we know that's true because look how it affects the relationships of the tangible people. I mean, God, because he's not tangible, but like your people that are alive, like in your house that you're interacting with. So there are a couple of questions that it's like, how do I know? How do I know if my receptors are off? I mean, I think if something traumatic is going on or you haven't healed from something in the past, that's one way, right?
Well,
sometimes it's
interesting
obvious.
Thing is, it will affect you physically, your physical body.
Yes, like you're tired.
You're tired. If it's been going on for a long time, you will get heart disease. You can have autoimmune disorders. You can have gestational. Is that the right word?
Diabetes.
Yeah, you just have like problems with your gut.
Oh, that's gastrointestinal.
Yes,
Yeah.
and so all of these things have to do with the amount of anxiety and stress and PTSD.
Yeah.
It's so fascinating.
It's a cortisol thing in your body. Like
Yeah.
too much is not a good thing. But so there's some simple things that you can ask yourself. Like if you can't clear your mind and get it like off of a certain problem or situation at any point in the day, like it's just constantly with consuming you, waking you up in the middle of the night. Your little RCs are probably off. Like there's a glitch in the system, right? And I mean constant. I mean every now and then there's something that happens in the day, and we may wake up in the middle of the night and and then go back to sleep, but the next day we're fine. But this is like a perpetual kind of thing. If you just fight or flight, like you just feel like you want to run away.
Oh,
and
all
hide,
the time.
Or if you just want to fight someone.
All the time.
Your RCs may be off.
Oh, yeah. They are super off.
And sometimes more than others.
Right.
Because like when you're growing, but if you feel like that all the time.
Yeah.
Which I think is probably what you noticed, especially you began to notice several years ago, which is when you started working on it.
Right. It's like, wait a minute. You don't want to fight everyone. You're not always worried about the person in the corner. I'm so confused.
Yeah. I know. Like, what? Is that normal? I'm normal. Okay. So what if you're sitting with someone and, or a friend calls you, or your kid's sitting down, or your spouse, and you're just like, I just don't even care what you're saying. I don't really care about what you're feeling right now. I don't have the capacity. That's another indicator, like that you're just off.
Right.
That you might need to pay attention to something. Or, I mean, this is fight or flight. Like you just want someone or some situation just to go away. I mean, every now and then again, I think that's normal. But if it becomes a pattern, I think, that's when, those are just some questions like you could ask yourself where it's like, okay, my little receptors may be off. Like for me recently, there's been a lot of stress about college decisions and spring break trips and, my mom having her eye surgery and just all these little things that were balls that are up in the air. And, I'm trusting the Lord with them, but I couldn't get them. I was working really hard to try to get my brain off of sitting on them all the time.
Right. And you had a lot all at once.
Right. So sometimes you have to give yourself grace. Right. And that's when my time with the Lord was really special, but at least I could connect with him, which I was really grateful for because of my practice in the past.
Right. It's like we said last week, if you were under anesthesia, when you came out in that little fog, you would be preaching.
Hopefully.
It would be Jesus. It'd be funny.
Or maybe cussing. I don't know.
It would be just like Jesus would want it, though. For sure.
True.
So I think it's interesting that you're talking about this because I had a week last week we were talking about. It's just crazy. And so I've been running in the morning with a friend at in the dark. Okay. She has 2 dogs. And she's like, well, no one will ever get us with our 2 dogs. And I said, well, I have my taser. We don't need your taser because I have my 2 dogs. I'm like, no, this is what I need. And so I'm running with my taser. It's pitch black. There's not a lot of street lights, 6 a.m., not a lot going on. And so one morning I was there and she canceled like 2 minutes before I went running. And I was almost at her house and I thought, I'm going to go. I'm just going to go. I'm going to go because...
And you didn't have your taser?
I did have my taser.
Oh, you did have it. Okay.
And so I ran with my taser, but what I realized is how far I'd grown, because before there is no way I would have done, and I made myself.
Yeah.
It was uncomfortable, but it's practicing.
It is.
Practicing the new normal.
And what you're doing when you push yourself like that is you are reconnecting. You are forming those connections in your brain that had been unwired in the past from trauma and that sort of thing. So you're creating those connections again, which will give you more confidence as you continue. So that's the beauty of it. See how God made us?
Right. She was so funny. She called me. She's like, I am so sorry. Did you actually do that? I'm not sure how you did that. Because she knows me well enough to know
Isn't that sweet?
That's not a Melissa thing.
Well, I think, so people are, it's going to be like, okay, so I've recognized that my receptors are off.
Right.
My
Now
RCs.
what do I do?
Now what? Like, how do I work through it? And so some of that is the acknowledgement and the working through it. It's counseling, is sitting with God. It can look different for everyone. If it's just like a couple of days or something, I'm telling you, a gratitude journal gets us out of our brains and out of the spiral so much faster. If it's like, okay, here I am. I'm noticing all these things. I can't get this off my mind. I'm shifting. I'm shifting. I'm going to create a new pattern in my brain right now. I am thankful for the fact that I woke up this morning, that I had something to eat for breakfast, that I have a car to drive my kids to school in, that I can call a friend and ask her to pray for me. Whatever it is, like all the things, shift that thinking in your brain and create a new pattern, a new connection.
That, and I also think adding to that is I am trusting God with these things, but then also acknowledging who God is.
Yes.
Because just saying I trust God with that is very different than saying I actually trust God with that, the one who created the earth or the one who created my brother or myself. I'm trusting that God who created me has this figured out because he's a creator. He's omnipotent.
And I'm just a girl.
Right. And so I think adding that extra layer of acknowledging just how great God is. And if you don't know, start in the Psalms.
Yes. Great. Always a great place to start. And so, the beauty of this constant connection, this daily connection with the Lord is, that when you spend time with friends, the more you spend time together, you start to emulate their language patterns, even their mannerisms. We began to do things we didn't do before. I mean, it's why we want our kids to hang out with good people.
That's why my kids and my whole family says facts now, because of you.
See?
Facts.
You just never know. And so when we're connecting to God on a regular basis, what happens is we can more easily emulate and recognize him when we get in these states of, oh my gosh, okay, this is so stressful, whatever. It's like, okay, but what's your natural connection? And if it's there and if we've created it, it's easier to fall back onto.
Right.
So you have to establish the connections with him so that you can fall back into that pattern.
And it's work.
It is. But it's beautiful work.
It's beautiful work. It's not glorious, I'll tell you. It's hard work, but it is the kind of work that doesn't go away. It's the foundation, right? It's building your house on rock instead of sand.
And I think to me, like, that's why it's so beautiful. It's so inefficient and so annoying and so frustrating. And I hate all the crying and whatever else, that comes with all the things. But it's so beautiful because it changes you and you do begin to see such a difference in your patterns, your way of living, your way of interacting with others, your way of seeing the world. And it's what scripture says. We become more like him. Mm-hmm. And it's because we're creating those connections. And we also have to check in, because when we start to have these thoughts if we're not checking back in with God regularly and asking ourselves, now, is that from God?
Right.
Does that bring me peace and confidence and security? Because if it's not from God. Like, he's not that guy that's going to be like, get on back to your field and take care of your scrawny little sheep. That's not how God talks, okay? I'm telling you. And so it's kicking that thought out and holding on to the ones that only come from God, which also it inhibits us breaking those connections that we've made with these false barriers from these lies. So it keeps those connections strong. And every time we do that, it's like adding another layer of fiber to the cable.
Yeah.
To him.
I think, I love to tell the people that are my people, like, hey, just want you to know, I'm so thankful for you because I know that I can come to you. And so acknowledging that within them also gives them permission to know, like your friends, that they can also go, hey, so I don't think that really was what you were supposed to be doing.
Right.
Like speak a little truth into my life. So I think checking in with your people that know you better than you know yourself.
Well, they're on the outside looking in.
Yeah.
And so they can see it for what it is, and sometimes we cloud things.
Well, what's really
it's
funny?
hard to accept some things that we are sometimes.
Yeah, it's funny because you and I were in a situation recently where you thought, well, this might work for you, it might not work for you, and I thought it might work for me, and then it turned out it wouldn't work out for me, but you knew that I was backing it up with God, right? And
Totally.
so you were just like,
girl, it just is what it is.
that's just not what I thought, but hey, God's got your back on that one. And so it's only because we know each other so well, and I've let you into all the, the gaps.
That's right. Keeping that connection. So this has been a lot.
For us too.
Checking in with God, establishing a connection with him so that it's always there, and then checking in on your little RCs. Those little RCs are so important. Those little relational circuits that are in our brain. I mean, it's a thing. And God created us. So he made those little circuits in our brains. And he desires for them to be healthy and connected to him and to others so that we can be better in living his love out to other people and ourselves.
I think we should add some resources in the show notes for this because this is going to probably open people's eyes for the first time to RCs.
Yes. I mean, mine too. Just saying. Yes, we'll put a few resources in there. And it's just so cool sometimes. I feel as if in the world there can seem to be so much of a divide. Like you have to choose one. You have to choose religion or you have to choose science. But God created us and everything. And so there's no separating them. He's created us in a way to always seek and desire him. That's in our hearts, in our whole being. And it's just interesting to see the connections.
Yeah.
To me, it just makes him so much more. It's bringing to life all the things that we read about and who he says he is, but into a different reality. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Thanks for hanging in there with us today with our science episode. Thanks for joining us this week on our science episode of The Sinner and the Saint. We'll look forward to being with you next time.